Welcome, everybody. Where are the best mining exploration and investment opportunities in Canada currently, and how can you capitalize on them? My name is Kai Hoffmann. I'm the CEO of Oreninc. We're a capital data provider here out of Vancouver. We track financings in this sector, and I'm joined by Gwen Preston, the resource maven, Joe Mazumdar, Exploration Insights, Walter Coles Jr. of Skeena Resources, and David Terry of Genesis Metals. Really appreciate Minds and Money inviting me to host this panel. Thanks to everybody for dialing in. Really appreciate it. And I'm not going to introduce the panelists myself. It's kind of boring. Like let's let them do the talking. You guys don't want to hear me talk. So I'm going to throw a question in there, and I'm going to go clockwise because David is right next to me on the right. And the question is, it's the same one for everybody. What qualifies you to be on this panel? What's your connection to Canada?
Well, I'm Canadian. Somebody asked me to be on the panel, I guess, but yeah, I'm the CEO of a company that's exploring in the Abitibi in central Canada, and on the board of Great Bear Resources, which is also exploring in central Canada. I've done a lot of work in Canada over the years. I've also done a lot of work outside of Canada over the last 20 years, predominantly Latin America. So I guess that gives me some sort of a vantage point.
Fantastic. We're going to touch on that because we're going to work out why Canada is so fantastic to invest in a couple of minutes. But next up, and if we go clockwise, Walter, you're next. What's your connection, and what do you do? Give us a quick rundown.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm not a Canadian citizen. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I am working here in British Columbia. We have the company that I run is called Skeena Resources, and we have a project called Eskay Creek, which is in the Golden Triangle of northwestern BC. And I guess I'm, here on the panel to present my perspective of what it's like to be developing a project in British Columbia.
Fantastic. Joe, you write a newsletter out of Vancouver. What's your connection? What's your feel?
I am Canadian, but most of my experience is actually outside of Canada. So I'm happy to hear what all the other panelists have to say.
Fantastic. Gwen, what's your investment focus as well? Give us a rundown of your letter. What do you look at?
Sure. I write a series of newsletters about what I'm buying, selling, and thinking in the metals and mining space. And so, I'm always searching for investment opportunities to make money for myself and my subscribers. And that jurisdiction is clearly one of the considerations therein, and has been, more and less so as the market does different things up, down, left, and right. So yes, Canada, some of the top jurisdictions have really stood out of late. And so I think that's certainly a factor right now. I'm Canadian, for whatever that's worth.
Now we're going to work out why Canada stands out versus other jurisdictions, and other jurisdictions like Australia or South America come to mind there. And let's start with David again. Tell us a little more about what you were working on. You're in Quebec. You're in the Chibougamau camp. You're east of Val-d'Or in the eastern Abitibi Greenstone Belt. There's a bit of a staking rush. There's a bit of activity out there. What makes you stand out there, and why have you chosen to work in that area?
Well, it probably doesn't have as large a past production as some of the other places that you mentioned, but it's substantial. It's produced, the Chibougamau-Chapais mining district's produced almost 7 million ounces of gold over the past century. And there is a lot of activity there. There's a new deposit that was discovered over the last several years, and the maiden resource came out in 2019. That's Nelligan. It's an IAMGOLD joint venture with a junior. 3 million ounce deposit. It's about 15 kilometers south of our project. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of activity in that area, and it's a very prospective and I think underexplored part of the world.
Fantastic. Walter, you're running an exploration company, or soon to be development company in the Golden Triangle. That's also a very prolific area. You're standing out there with some great high grade results that you just put out this week, I think, or late last week as well. Run us through your story for a second there.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying about a decade ago, a prominent mining engineer made the comment to me when I was working in an investment fund investing in these projects. He said, good grades make for good miners. And I think that's what we have in the Golden Triangle. It's an area that has the most incredible grades in the world for mineral deposits, especially gold and silver deposits. And that's what we have at Eskay Creek. We've delineated a deposit that has a resource of about 4 million ounces gold equivalent. That's gold and silver, with an average grade of about 4 grams. So, stellar grades in a politically stable jurisdiction, to me, that equals a golden unicorn. And that's what I call Eskay Creek. And I think that's what makes us stand out. But I'd also add that for our particular project, it's a brownfield site. So we already have a fully permitted tailings facility. We've got $2 billion worth of hydroelectric facilities 7 kilometers from our project, which is incredible. If you've been up to that region, it's very remote, and to have all access, all year round access for roads and power, it's an incredible place to be working. And then the last thing I'd mention is we really do have very strong government support and First Nation support for the project. At $1,700 gold, $20 silver, this project will generate almost $971 million of tax revenue for the province and for the federal government. And part of that will go to the Tahltan First Nation. So there are a lot of stakeholders in this project, and it's a great thing to be part of.
Oh, that's fantastic. That sounds really enticing. And we're going to drill down more in the Golden Triangle in a second here. Joe, from previous conversations, I remember you're not too keen on greenstone belts because as a geologist, you don't have too much to add because you can just pick up a shovel and find high grade gold, especially when you go at depth. What other areas in Canada are quite attractive for you?
Well, I mean, the Golden Triangle obviously is another spot, but there's parts of Canada as well all over, like whether it's the Yukon, Northwest Territories, that are prospective. I mean, the question is, like Walter was talking about, is infrastructure. And, where you can find infrastructure, that saves a lot of money in terms of capital, but also while you're exploring, makes everything cheaper. And so bang for buck, you can do more with less. And that's what's one of the things that's attractive about especially British Columbia and Quebec with a lot of hydropower. But now with COVID-19, it's not just about being able to raise money, it's if you can do actually anything with the money. And as you were saying about South America, countries, people that are operating in Chile or Peru or Brazil and that have more problems actually getting people in or working, especially if they have to deal with remote communities. Whereas, people are working in Nevada, they're working in the Golden Triangle, they're working in Ontario, Quebec, and the Yukon and that. And that's really, in this kind of market, you need news flow. And that's an important part of it.
Fantastic. And I really want to work out like other regions as well. You hinted at the Yukon, the Northwest Territories. One region I haven't heard yet is Newfoundland and the Maritime region. And it was Gwen, that's your question. Like what areas are you focusing on in Canada? Do you have a favorite? Is it the Yukon? Is it the Golden Triangle, or even the Abitibi?
I wouldn't say that I have a favorite. I think that having favorites can be a weakness, because then that puts your focus on one area when actually there's a lot of opportunity spread across our great nation, so she says. But there really is. I mean, from the new interest in Newfoundland right across through Quebec, through Ontario, there's well-known regions in those provinces. There's newer regions in those provinces that are getting exploration attention, all the way across to BC and go north from there. All of these regions have had exploration surges in the past. Many are having new ones right now. There's a huge amount of opportunity in this country, and most jurisdictions are, in the grand scheme of the world, pretty functional. They're pretty supportive. There's obviously issues here, there. There's local challenges, but in general, Canada is a pretty functional place to do exploration. As Joe mentioned, if you can get to your project without too much cost, if the local support is there for you to operate in that area, then there's lots of opportunity. So I would say I look at it in a company by company question, not in okay, I want to find, I think everything that's good that's going to happen in Canada is going to happen in the Yukon or whatever it might be.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's quite diverse, but it's still so versatile. It's fantastic. Joe, I want to get back to you here. And we got two CEOs that have direct experience with flow-through financing. And one thing I want to work out, that's quite unique to Canada, is a flow-through structure. Why don't you explain to our listeners and viewers for a second, what is flow-through? Because it's a Canadian model. And maybe we'll go even to charity flow-through. And what does it mean for the companies, for example, for Genesis or even Skeena, who's raised quite a bit of flow-through recently to fund their exploration?
Yeah, it's a way of funding exploration, which helps mining, which is an integral part of the economy. Some people might doubt that, but it is. So to help fund these companies in times where, there's just no investment, desire. to invest in these companies. But problematically, the issue becomes if you're buying shares as a person who's interested in the project, you have a certain component of shareholders that are basically disinterested in news flow and what's actually happening with the company, and I've just bought it as a tax write-off. And it's even more hyped up with the charity flow through or the super charity flow through, unless you have somebody at the end of it that will actually buy the shares. Once you have that, then you don't have that risk of somebody dumping a bunch of shares once the hold's over. And so companies that have manufactured that and done it well have basically figured that structure out well. And they raise at a premium, 30 to 40%, and they don't have the risk that somebody's going to dump it because now they put those shares in an interested holder, not in a disinterested one. So you can do it well, but I've seen a lot of companies not do it very well.
Well, it's difficult as well because you have certain spending requirements as well. And Walter's, like, I'm going to get to you as well. Like, I think you just raised over $30 million in flow through. Run us through the process and how much of a premium we're able to achieve, and how does that help with you minimizing dilution as well? That's a massive shareholder value or benefit as well.
Yeah, well, let me start by going back a few years ago. We used to take money from dedicated flow-through funds, and it showed up in our stock price because 4 months after the hold period was over, these people would keep the tax credit and they would hammer our stock price. And so we learned some hard lessons. So now we will never take money again, as long as I'm CEO, from a dedicated flow-through fund. We will only set up the charity flow-through swap, where we make sure at the end buyer is someone who wants to hold our stock, and it works out beautifully. So for the last 2 years, any capital that we raised has been in that sort of structure that makes sure we don't get hit after the 4-month period is over. Now, with regards to the premiums, they fluctuate anywhere from 30% to 50%. There's a bit of a supply and demand dynamic to it. When every company right now has money and they want to do charity flow-through swaps, the people who are buying the tax credits have more bargaining power. So in the market right now, the ratios have drifted down to around 35%, where when we did our deal back in the fall, well, in the spring and the fall, we were getting around 1.5 bump. So really, it's incredible. If you're going to raise 10 million, instead you get 15 million. It's a spectacular program that Canada has for exploration companies to take advantage of.
No, it's fantastic. Like, minimizing dilution is the number one factor in junior exploration, in my opinion, as well. And David, like, having projects in Quebec, you actually have access to different sorts of funding as well. And I mean, the Caisse de dépôt, for example. Can you run us through what makes Quebec a bit special for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, along the same line as what Walter was talking about, the charity flow through premium in Quebec is a bit higher than it is in some of the other provinces. So, resulting in even less dilution. And we've certainly we've taken advantage of that mechanism in both of our previous 3 financings, I guess. And as well, there's dedicated funds, as you point out, in Quebec that are just there to support mineral exploration, and we've also got some of them as shareholders as well. So it's a very favorable jurisdiction for working as a junior company in Quebec.
Yeah, fantastic, David. I'm going to stay on you for 1 second because I want to switch over to permitting. We've briefly touched on it, but we haven't really elaborated on it. Is permitting, like, what does it look like for you, and how happy are you with the straightforward process Canada generally offers?
Well, it varies obviously by province to province. At least in Canada, I think it's fairly straightforward in most jurisdictions, in my experience. And the time frames are different, though, from province to province. I must say, in Quebec, since I've been working there over the past 6-8 months, our time frame for getting drill permits from the time we put the application in, it's about 10 days, which I've never seen anywhere in any jurisdiction that I've worked in for a long time. So that's really quite good. But in most other jurisdictions, you can get permits within like a month and a half or something like that.
No, fantastic. And one thing I want to touch on real quick as well with you, Walter, is ESG. And for me, the S is really big in ESG as well. You mentioned the Tahltan First Nations. Can you elaborate on your agreements with the First Nations a bit, and how is it working with First Nations here in North America or in Canada specifically?
Yeah, I feel privileged to work with the Tahltan's First Nation. We have a relationship with them going back 5 years now. We started with a communications agreement with them, then an exploration agreement, and now we're working on an environmental agreement with them that will go into sort of a chapter of the impact benefits agreement that we're working on as well, or just getting started on working on with them. We take an approach that we're guests operating in the traditional Tahltan territory. So we're only there so long as they want us to be there and want us to be their partner. And I think that, with that sort of attitude, it's blossomed into what we think is a strong relationship of mutual trust. And, I look forward to, hopefully we'll be getting, advancing SK into one of the next large mines in Canada. And, I think my hope and Chad Day, who's president of the Tahltan, we want to figure out how we make the Tahltan equity shareholders in Skeena, because we want them, and I think they want to develop the skills to be owners in mines in their territory. So it's a commitment we've made to them. We're going to help them learn how to do that, learn how to take on that skill set, and I think it's a win-win for all parties.
Yeah, I really enjoyed meeting them at previous conferences as well. They're really outgoing. They want to show that they're open for business as well. They're very cooperative. So I like seeing that as well. It's not too many, let's say, First Nations or the communities around mines that go out to conferences like PDAC or so to meet with stakeholders and other investors. So that's always good to see. Joe, I was going to chat with you as well, in particular, because I know you've got quite a bit of Australian experience as well. You follow a couple stocks out there, and since I know we have a bit of an Australian audience here as well, I want to work out for a second the differences between Canadian projects and maybe Australian projects. Is there any major differences? Let's keep flow through aside for a second here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with Australia and I'm working in there, and also with companies and management teams there. And that's an important part of the letter, is not only being able to pick the company, but pick the right management team and having that comfort given the time zone difference. So if you do that, a bit of comfort with the management teams is vital, and I have that. The thing about Australia is that you don't get a lot of weird share structures where a lot of people have shares that are being distributed at different times, like in some Canadian companies that you have to go through. Share structures in Australia are cleaner. They're blown out. More like, 500 million is a tight share structure there. So you got to get used to that, but in terms of, they tend to not issue a lot of warrants when they finance. So in terms of the future, there's not a lot of new shares coming out potentially. And a lot of them do the transition very well from exploration, discovery, to actually bringing it into production, which is a lot rarer, if that's a word, on the TSX. I don't see that transition done as well as I have seen in Australia. That I have, I've seen so many well-run companies in Australia manage that transition, which is very hard for a junior. They do it very well. It's rarer in Canada just because a lot more people look for that M&A takeout rather than taking it to development like Walter's trying to do at Skeena.
One rumor is that Australians are better miners. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, they're a little bit more no nonsense about what they're trying to do. When they look for a company or a project, they're looking at the way I would look at it is, can I develop something that's economic? They're not looking to just put out some intersections and a resource on something that they don't think somebody would develop, which would probably be them. They try to do that. And also about Australia, if ASX in Australia, the other thing they have a big advantage is infrastructure. So if you do find something, you'll have plants all around you. that you could do. I mean, one of the great stories for me was Gold Road that we owned. Well, that went from discovery to actually commercial production in about 5 years. Totally unheard of. And this is remote, and this is grassroots exploration. I mean, ridiculous, but they did it. And we're seeing a lot more of that in Australia, mostly in I would say Western Australia. But now we're seeing a lot more activity as well in the Fosterville district, and I've exposed myself to some companies up in Queensland as well.
Fantastic. Gwen, I want to touch with you is like you follow obviously a wide bandwidth of companies. Like, if you'd have to look at your recommendations, what percentage of those are Canadian-based projects? Like, if you had to guess, you probably know.
Probably 15 to 20%, I would guess. For sure. I would say, I mentioned earlier that, the importance of jurisdiction waxes and wanes with the markets, and that I really think that that's important. When the markets are crappy, like they were for a long time, jurisdiction becomes comes more and more to the fore, because, investors aren't willing to, there's so many risks inherent in investing in mining that when the markets themselves are also risky, they just pare down the number of things that they're willing to take on. And so jurisdictional risk becomes an absolute no-go. They just are not willing to take that on. And so that really helps safe jurisdictions for mining, like Canada, like, lots of parts of America. There's jurisdictions that just rise to the top. And that happened in the bear market, but more importantly, I think it happened in those sort of the sideways markets that we had 2016, 17, 18, 19, before we got into the more dramatic upswing that we're in right now. There was, companies were starting to be able to function again, and there was some money coming in and they could operate. And really, if you were able to, the companies that were able to raise money and get going again were those that focused on low risk jurisdiction, because again, investors were not willing to take on jurisdictional risk. Now, as this market continues to rise, you will see more and more risky jurisdictions come to the fore. No doubt that happens every bull market, and that's okay, because a strong market can support jurisdictional risk, and investors can take on jurisdictional risk when the other risks are more moderate. So yeah, I think there's a real dynamic there that you need to be aware of. And just in general with Canada, I think through the conversation that we've had so far, the topics that you've brought up are all just examples of how Canada is pretty darn good at supporting mineral exploration. They are not perfect. There's absolutely, challenges. But if you go from the flow-through structure to the Quebec funds to pretty good funding for geological surveys across the provinces, various exploration grants that provinces provide, pretty good permitting, again, varies province to province, but in general, these things are pretty functional. There's just overall support for exploration through the process. That makes it possible to do more and to get investors more interested. So yeah, I think it's not just one thing or another. It's really whether the entire system is set up to help foster success. And Canada has a lot of those boxes checked.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And our data at Oreninc backs that up as well, because we've seen the percentage of flow-through financings decrease on the overall financing dollars raised. So that means jurisdictional risk is being, I wouldn't say ignored, but pushed aside a little bit as money flows into regions that were previously ignored, I'd say. A couple questions, like the TSX versus ASX is also an interesting debate, because we have a couple companies that are listed on the TSX and TSX Venture instead of going on the ASX with Australian projects. And this is maybe a question for the companies as well, like Walter and David, like feel free to jump in here. Is there a particular reason that you like the TSX, or is there something did you see as an advantage? Would you even dual list in Australia? Is there interest from Australian producers or even Australian retail?
Well, I looked pretty seriously at getting a TSX, an ASX listing last year. We went to Australia, did a roadshow. There is a significant amount of capital in Australia that's sort of captive there that can only invest on the ASX. So it's certainly an advantage if you do that. You are taking on more regulatory requirements to undertake the dual listing between the two. In our case, what we've decided is we'd like to go add a listing in the US. Since we're so close to the United States, it's such an enormous, deep capital market. To us, that I think that probably makes a little bit more sense.
And it's
David, have
not
you seen
something
more
that
of
we've
an
looked at for Genesis at this stage. We're just too small to consider listing on the ASX.
No, that makes sense. Like, but just curious. Like, I know you can't tell us who's in your data room, or so. Like, if there's Australians knocking, because I hear Australian producers are looking all over the world to add more assets. Is there anything you could tell us about that, or?
Yeah, we've heard these rumors too.
I mean, I think
No,
the bottom line there is that the Australian mining market started strengthening several years before the Canadian one. And so those Australian operators have had a few years more to get their balance sheets in order and to get the gumption up to start doing the M&A that the North American listed companies are sort of only just starting to do. And so, yeah, they're ahead of the curve on that. But there's a huge amount of difference. I mean, I think I'm no expert on this, but from what I've seen and experienced, there is a big difference in how you operate mines, in what kinds of assets are synergistic, make sense, should be under the same mantle. And then there's also different, like Australian investors and North American investors also are different in how they gather their information and what risks they are and are not willing to take on. So those are, you can think of those as downsides, or you can think of them as upsides, whether you're an investor or an issuer. You just have to be aware that there are differences. And I would say some location for the project certainly plays a role. Like Walter says, he's in BC, obviously he should be listed in Canada. America is right next door. That probably makes sense. A company that's exploring in Vietnam, where does it make sense for them to list? Well, probably just in an area that's, in the market that's closer, because that just physically makes more sense. And Australians are more comfortable with Vietnam because it's closer than, the average British Columbian. So those are sort of not super deeply educated statements, but I think there are some big picture things there that make sense. And Australians do have that money. They are looking, but the time zone difference and the distance is important, and it's difficult to run a major company that's spread right across the world. So it has to be a really good asset for them to make that leap.
Now, if we have any Australians, I'd actually be happy to hear like where you guys are based right now, because it's early in the morning. I'm not even sure if Perth is up yet, so maybe it's just Sydney and Melbourne. So, but Joe, we have a tremendous task ahead of us. Like we got to work out how we can capitalize on investing in Canadian projects or Canadian mining companies. Do you have a couple ideas for us? How can we all capitalize? How can we make money investing in Canadian mining companies?
Canadian mining companies operating in Canada, or Canadian mining companies?
Let's keep the Canada focus on it. Like, it's a very generic questions, like investment opportunities in Canada currently, and how can we capitalize on them? It doesn't say specifically the TSX or the venture. So let's hone it down on just Canada, TSX, and TSXV Canadian projects.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you look at district from district to district, and you see what the intermediates and the bigger companies are interested in. You've seen the Australians come into northern BC with Red Chris. You've seen them come into Red Lake. You've seen them go into, I think it's Nova Scotia. And part of that, I think, is actually, not only because they tend, because the Australian dollar was so weak at one point that their own dollar was, the gold price was so high in a period where a lot of other commodities were weak. And so they didn't have the labor costs, they had lower fuel prices, they were generating a lot of free cash flow. But they decided at that point not to invest more in their own, let's say, jurisdiction in Australasia. They were having trouble, in the Philippines, they were having trouble in other parts of Asia. So they decided to go to another safe jurisdiction. And that was Canada. Some of them have gone to Latin America, but in my history before, and working in Latin America and working in Australia, it used to be that the Australians would just go into these places, go bankrupt basically, and then come back to Australia. Now they like things like in Canada, where it's stable and that they could operate long term and put a footprint in, just like Remarco with Hale. The question is right now, if you're looking at any kind of explorer, you're looking for who's going to buy that one, and what are they looking for. Newmont right now apparently is not looking for Red Lake style mineralization. but potentially the company that bought that asset would be. So you gotta think about what they're looking at. Or in the Golden Triangle, the last big purchase was Red Chris. Is there another Red Chris out there that maybe somebody that Newcrest would want? So when you're looking at M&A and that's your end game, then you have to be very suitor specific with respect to who's going to come in there. But now with the Australians in, not only in Canada, but also in Alaska, you open that up a bit. To other companies, despite the fact that we've had a lot of consolidation. And Barrick and Newmont are both interested in copper gold porphyries, and in the area of Golden Triangle is definitely something they would be looking at. And Newmont took 50% of Galore Creek, so that's really what you want to look at. What's getting bought? What are they looking at? And can you make a comp for the asset that the exploration company is looking for? Would that be something somebody might want in the long term?
Before I come back to David and Walter, I want to ask Gwen real quick because Joe's approach is quite conservative. He's going the takeover route. No premium mergers, share deals, right? That we're seeing right now. But Gwen, like, where's the leverage? Like, where can we actually make, let's say, instead of the very good 30% on a takeover offer, Joe? How can we make 100%, 200%? Like, where's some leverage for Canadian assets? Is there something we could still, like, even at $2,000 gold, is there still something left for us to make money on?
Absolutely. That's why we all invest in exploration, right? I mean, that is, if you want the multi-baggers, you have to be at the early stages of the discovery curve, not in the defined deposits, perhaps with economics even wrapped around them, that a major might come shopping for. You're just in a very different section or part of the process and a very different risk profile within that. And so, I mean, as a general comment in this, for this kind of conversation, when the gold markets get strong, we all see certain stocks that we're watching go absolutely crazy. They hit into some exciting news, the share price doubles, triples, whatever it might be. We get a few of those maybe in our portfolio. That's fantastic. That's why we play this game. My comments there are, first of all, don't start to think that just because we're in a good market, exploration always works. It doesn't. There's a lot of exploration that doesn't work. And so don't just let your guard down and say, it's a team exploring in the Golden Triangle. That means they're going to make a discovery and the share price is going to triple. That's not the way that it works. So you have to really have your checklist of requirements and then be aware that even for every company that meets that checklist of requirements, there's a fairly good likelihood that they will not succeed in the specific goal that they're pursuing at that moment, and they may have to go to the next one or the next one or the next one before they perhaps do make a discovery. But if you do want that massive leverage, you have to play the discovery end of the spectrum. And so you need to just figure out what your checklist is and how to find companies that meet that bill, and then invest in them, and be aware that it has to be a portfolio approach, because not that many are successful. You have to buy quite a few, and a bunch of them perhaps won't do anything that exciting, but in a good market, they'll probably just perform with the market, sort of sit there. And then if one or two really work, then it doesn't really matter where you put the rest of your money. That's what triples do for you. So anyways, that's where you get the real, and it's not leverage, it's exploration, it's discovery. It's a different component in the process.
Yeah, I used the wrong term there. It's not leverage, it's just upside. Let's use that. So, and Joe, I didn't mean to pigeonhole you there, just that you're investing in development stage companies that are waiting for a takeover, right? So I actually like that you find the grassroots.
You could have made a double on Barrick, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can all be brilliant. But the question really, the word discovery gets bandied around so much that it becomes a word that's almost used like an article. And you could easily make a triple nowadays on a company that has no chance of finding something that's economic and will never get taken out.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy.
No, it's like
re-drill a hole, it goes up, and hopefully you didn't buy the paper and you don't have to hold it for 4 months.
Yeah.
We're going to see a lot of paper come out in the next 4 months, and, some of that will put a lot of downward pressure on some of these stocks. And so, I mean, the thing that we do is try to look for the fatal flaws. That way I don't get bandied about when I know I can't buy something in the letter knowing it's going to fail, even though it'll probably go up anyway. And that's really the market we're in.
It makes our job really hard because we're all trying to pick the winners and trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? But the whole thing goes up. The whole market goes up. We
It
all
makes
look.
the job very easy.
Well, you
look
can't be
smart.
wrong anyway.
Yeah, exactly. You look smart, but that doesn't mean you are.
And I think part of it too is when you do have that stock in your portfolio that makes a discovery hit, or that's what it's labeled as, you have to make a decision about what you think is going to happen next. Do you think that they actually have tapped into a significant discovery? If so, what you're going to do with your position is very different than if you think, okay, they got a good hit, the market loved it, maybe I should, take what was given and move on. Or are you somewhere in the middle? Do you want to take some of your capital back off the table because that's the opportunity that you were given, and keep some of it in case it does play out and turn into something significant? So don't fall in love with your stories. Try and remain pragmatic and educate yourself about what the hit looks like and where it may or may not be going, so that you can make a decision about whether to attach yourself to the story or not.
We had a question come in. I want to circle back real quick to ESG as well, and that's one for Walter and David. Is a question like, are Canadian miners guilty of ignoring threats of climate change? Walter, you're active in the Golden Triangle. Like, there are a couple of projects that are working now in areas where there used to be a glacier. Maybe you can comment in general. I haven't been to the Skeena, the SK Creek project yet, but I know there's some certain projects in the area that are doing that. So maybe we can comment on that. And then also, David, if you want to chime in there as well, do you hear the ESG question in general more? So maybe Walter, you can take this, and David, chime in there.
Well, I think every company, in the world is trying to think about this aspect today. I will say that our two projects, SNP and SK Creek, when they were previously in operation in the 90s and the 2000s, they were both powered by diesel and propane. And today we have the good fortune of 3 brand new hydroelectric facilities next to us that will be providing the power for those operations. So, I think it's an evolution. We all want to get there. We all want to see sort of electric mining trucks and electric shovels. And I think over time we'll try to do our part to contribute to that.
David, in terms of ESG, have you been hearing more from funds or institutional investors? Have they been pressuring you not pressuring, but asking you about it? Like what you as Genesis Metals are doing about it?
Yeah, and particularly more in the sort of community relations aspect of things. At our stage, we're at a much earlier stage than Walter's company, but that's something that everybody has to consider and have the right answers for as we implement our projects.
I think we have like 60 seconds left if my timer is not broken. So I just want to give everybody a few seconds to sort of maybe summarize it. Like David's, just because we were on you, why is Canada special? Why do you like it, and what should we look out for?
Well, we've got a long history of mineral exploration and discovery. A lot of northern Canada was built through mining investment and discoveries, and so we've got that legacy. And I think we've got a large talent pool here, and we've got the financial system. So it is one of the better places in the world to explore, I think.
Fantastic. Walter, do you have any closing remarks there?
Yeah, I just reiterate what David said. It's in the history and the culture of Canada, mining, and what that means is that if you find a deposit, if you make a discovery, the odds are pretty good that you'll be able to build a mine. And after you build it, the odds are good that it's not going to get nationalized and stolen from you.
Very good point. Gwen, what's closing remarks in regard to Canada? What do you think?
Canada is an absolutely immense land package. A lot of gold and silver and copper and whatnot has already been found here. But harkening back to an earlier comment from Joe, access has often been an impediment and still remains that way. So there's big swaths of this country that have yet to be explored. And we increasingly, every year there's a new road somewhere. There's a glacier that recedes somewhere. There are opportunities that are literally becoming available for exploration in this huge country every year. And so don't think that every rock has been overturned. That's absolutely not the case, let alone the idea of new geologic theories coming up. Great Bear is an example of that. Red Lake had seen a heck of a lot of exploration before Great Bear came in with a new idea of how to explore and came up with a phenomenal discovery. So new ideas, new access, new infrastructure. There's a lot of area left to explore in this country that has such a supportive system.
Perfect. Joe, it's like you get the last answer, and I forgot to ask one question. Is Warren Buffett invested in Barrick Gold, a Canadian company, and not Newmont to sign for you?
No, it's got nothing to do with that.
No, I
Absolutely nothing.
I just noticed that putting my questions together for this panel, like, Barrick is a Canadian company, why not go Newmont, right? So, but maybe you have some closing remarks on Canada. What should investors look out for, and how can we capitalize on this great country and the opportunities it presents?
Well, I mean, right now with the the COVID overlying everything we're doing, Canada and the States, Australia, a lot of the Scandinavia, what have you, these sort of jurisdictions where you can work is a big premium with respect to where you can't work, where logistically it's more difficult to get people in, get people out, especially if you're dealing with expats. The ability to access your properties and actually work in this environment of rising prices is a huge phenomenon right now. You have to have that news flow in this environment, and you'll get that with a Canadian operator.
Fantastic. This was the Minds and Money Global Connect panel. Where are the best mining exploration investment opportunities in Canada currently, and how can you capitalize on them? I'd really like to thank my panelists here, Gwen, Preston, Joe Mazumdar, David Terry, and Walter Colts Jr. Really appreciate you joining us. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was informative. My name is Kai Hoffmann. I'm the CEO of Oreninc, and if you have any questions, I think we're all widely available on our websites. You can find our contact information. Happy to answer any questions. I'm sure all my panelists are available for questions as well. I don't think we can be here in the Q&A chat of this panel of this presentation. So really appreciate Minds and Money letting me host this. And that's it from our end. Good afternoon from Vancouver.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.